McDonald.
Present.
Nicolosi.
Here.
Red.
Present.
Salgado.
Present.
20 present, no absent.
Thank you, Clerk Mullins. With that, I will turn things over to Mr. Wilson and ask everyone to stand for the prayer of the pledge, please.
Dear God, thank you for your grace and your mercy. Bless this group of county board members as we make decisions tonight that will affect this county. Thank you for blessing the first responders, men and women that are in the military. Lord, bless Rockford as a whole and Winnebago County. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Before we have our public participants come up, I did see Sheriff Caruana, Judge McGraw, and I believe State's Attorney Joe Briscato joining us, and our coroner, Mr. Inks. Thank you for those of you attending this evening. Under public participation is Reverend Shelby here this evening. Reverend Shelby. Okay, next speaker, Stephanie Hicks, to talk about pet health fair. Come on up. Thank you.
Hello. I'm coming to update the board today to give a brief background to the public here attending. We have a new non-for-profit in town that is working with Winnebago County Animal Services to assist with community outreach in saving lives and funds through animal services. On September 9th, we had a pet health fair at Black Hawk Courts. I thank the board for temporarily lowering the license fee for that event. There were the majority of the pets, 65 total that we served, that were most of them not compliant with license as it was. We were able to microchip them. 53 of them needed microchips. So this enables them, if they're lost, to be returned back home and not to go into the animal services facility. We also offered the vaccinations that we had talked about previously. And through community partnerships, we offered spay-neuter vouchers. So we had, 35 of the pet owners that came, the dogs were not fixed, but they desired their pets to be fixed. So we have some that did not receive the vouchers, but we are working with them as like a case management basis and calling up, and we are giving them the resources to follow through, so this will in the end have less intake on animals into animal services. So I passed out a breakdown of what our results were, so that's on all of your desks, as well as a brochure on our organization. So I just give you my thanks.
Thank you very much for the update. Our next speaker is Dick Cooner to talk key behavioral health. Thanks for coming in, Mr. Cooner.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I don't envy you this evening in your work. Yes, I am Dick Cooner. I'm a member of the Winnebago County Mental Health Advisory Committee, appointed by the previous chairman of the Winnebago County Board with the full consent of this board 6 years ago to comply with the state's statute. The committee was tasked with assessing the status of mental health services, including substance abuse, developmental disabilities, chronic psychiatric illness, identifying the gaps and making recommendations to address those gaps. And we have done that task. Several key community issues that emerged from the assessment: the need for crisis intervention, the lack of inpatient services, particularly for children and adolescents, the lack of family and community support, lack of outreach and early identification, and the lack of case management to maintain stability for these folks. As residents of Winnebago County, we lived under the specter of budget deficits seemingly for our life. We've heard the mantra, no more taxes. And addressing these gaps has a financial cost, but not addressing these issues has a far greater cost to the quality of life in our community, with more mentally ill folks and substance abusers in the jail, deaths due to overdoses, homelessness, underachievement in schools, and increased family disruption. Next week, you will see a campaign slogan of "Everybody knows someone." And the slogan says that everyone in this room knows someone who suffers from or has suffered from mental illness. 1 in 5 of us. And during our existence, our advisory committee produced a community study which confirmed our hypothesis that county residents see a need for more behavioral health services in the county. So where does behavioral need fit within the perplexing budget issues that you face? We see behavioral health on the edge of public safety. The key services will result in, or the lack of key services will result in more people, as I said, in hospital emergency rooms, the detention center, and our jail. What would be our committee's priority funding recommendation? We ask that you fund the triage center. It's a clinical service that serves the communities and the county law enforcement organizations.
Mr. Cooner, we're at 3 minutes, sir.
Okay? That's our request, is please fund the triage center. Thanks very much for this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooner. Our next speaker, Jane Carroll. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. My name is Jane Carroll, and I'm on the board of Northern Illinois Tea Party. We have come late to the party, this party. A fellow board member immersed herself in the 2017 and 2018 budgets for only a week and a half. The questions we have will reflect our amateur status. Chairman Haney reported that since 2014, the county has spent $5 million in reserves from its health care fund, not holding itself to its annual budget. In the proposed 2018 budget, revenues from the bankrupt state of Illinois are reduced, and revenues from taxpayers haven't recovered much since the 2008 nationwide financial crisis. I understand that county employees are required to pay 15% of the cost of their health care insurance. This is a great expense in the budget. We understand the difficulty of negotiating with the union, but families in Winnebago County are bearing up under heavier health care costs. And perhaps the union employees should bear more cost. Sheriff Caruana defends his decision to refuse federal funding for holding criminal aliens in the county jail, saying that personnel costs would exceed revenues. If the feds are only paying the county $75 per inmate per day, and it costs the jail $65 to feed and house them, not counting medical costs, then the sheriff's decision seems sensible. The budget shows 2 new capital improvement projects funded for $500,000. Is the $500,000 better spent elsewhere? Can the projects be deferred to a future date to help cover the budget shortfall? We would like to know more about the host fees. Is the county being too generous in the area of community development? Is it too generous to other governmental bodies and institutions? What is the cause of the $10 million increase in account 13500, Administrative Miscellaneous County? I appreciate the chance to mention these concerns before the board, and we certainly don't envy the board its responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carroll. Our next speaker, Anthony Maselli. Mr. Maselli.
Good evening. This is a response to the lack of facts presented at last week's county board meeting by numerous county board members out here. All these scenarios below are real facts that have been happening over the past couple of years, not unsupported facts. Mr. Jury, you called the past and requested special speed details in Argyle Road for the Sheriff's Department. We completed those, not using no taxpayer dollars, overtime dollars.
Point of order, they're not supposed to mention names.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Bianchi.
apologize, won't mention no names. I agree. When something really bad happens, a shooting, a homicide, etc., no agency will be successful without securing the scene, apprehended suspects without each other. There are many examples of these cases that have happened. One that sticks out in my mind is a brutal murder of a little girl on Men's Road. Without Loves Park PD, without the surrounding police agencies, there's no way we could secure a decade scene. New Year's Eve 2016, county deputies, Loves Park officers found a cliff breaker to assist Rockford PD in a large fight. A shooting occurred. This was this year's first homicide. County deputies were there within a matter of minutes with Loves Park officers to maintain the scene for nearly 30 minutes prior to Rockford getting there. What would have happened if deputies didn't respond in a timely fashion? How many other people would have been shot or killed that night? In the summer of 2016, again, there was a gunman at Crusader Clinic on Broadway in the middle of Rockford. Again, our deputies responded, Rockford officers, with a gunman in the hallway. We kept the hallways clear and held them up there so no one else was injured. And that day, deputies saved numerous lives because probably dozens of hundreds of people, men, women, children, said would have been shot and killed. A Rockford PD Deputy Chief, Carla Red, said thank you to us, and without the Sheriff's Department help, we wouldn't have this critical incident scene wouldn't have been contained. I've been a supervisor of numerous pursuits in this agency. Hundreds of criminals have been arrested, dozens of guns taken on the street, hundreds of grams of narcotics taken off. Numerous occasions, criminals said to me, that's why we're moving out of Winnebago County, because the Sheriff's Police are now chasing us down and arresting all of us. It's getting hot on these streets. This is a huge win for law enforcement when a career criminal tells me that. Cherryville Mall. There was 2 shootings last year. Let me quote the Cherry Valley Police Chief. Without the Sheriff's Department's assistance in both these incidents, numerous lives could have been lost at Cherryville Mall. Cherryville Mall would have been a ghost town until management staff hired back our deputies to assist them in securing and making the mall safe again. I'm going out to venture to say without the Sheriff's Department's help, we should save the mall from going under. I want to thank County Board Member, Mr. Gurl, for bringing up an amendment to reduce the Sheriff's budget last week. I know 3 or 4 of you board members are sitting out there personally, do not believe in these budget cuts. My old partner, Aaron Booker, is out there, and he can't believe
Mr.
it.
Maselli, we're at 3 minutes, sir.
Okay? These decisions you are making tonight should not be personal or political. Credit ratings can be repaired, like someone stated,
Mr.
and a victim
We're at 3 minutes.
or life cannot be replaced. Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Our next speaker, Tamara Shorter.
Good evening, Chairman and board members. My name is Tamara Shorter, and I'm the Vice President of AFSCME Local 448. I'm here tonight to advocate for those who are not able to in regards to how the budget cuts will affect public safety. I'm a state employee who frequents the Winnebago County Jail and the Juvenile Justice Center. How many of you frequent these buildings on a daily basis? Hands? Okay. Therefore, I feel that you may not be aware of how important the sheriff's deputy's presence is for state employees, court personnel, community members, family, and children. What happens when a person in the courthouse gets angry and lashes out at a state employee or court personnel because their children have been taken from them? All the sheriff's department at that time is going to say is, oh, we're sorry, we got here as fast as we can, we no longer have the staffing in the building. What do you do when the domestic violence rate in Winnebago County is high right now? We all know that. What will happen when that one individual who is brave enough to come to court to face his or her abuser and is then attacked by a perpetrator or the same perpetrator because there was a lack of sheriff's deputy presence? When deciding your vote tonight, please remember these situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Our final speaker is Ed Savosky. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, county board members. I have the distinct privilege of serving as Council 31 representative for AFSCME, representing Winnebago County employees, approximately 190 employees who perform critically important public safety work in the Criminal Justice Center, 911 Emergency Call Center, approximately some 600 employees in other departments in Winnebago. There's no dispute, corrections officers and 911 emergency telecommunicators have some of the most dangerous and stressful jobs in the country. Without them, this community will be less safe, our criminal justice system will be further stressed and in further jeopardy. Since 2007, the county is understaffed, safety-sensitive public service in both the jail and the 911 call center. It's a decade. Our union has repeatedly brought these concerns to the employer's attention. These concerns continue to receive short thrift. Now it appears that elected officials in this county are simply turning their backs on the badge. This week, our union has filed 2 additional grievances. One regarding staffing in the jail. There's a hearing set for January 4th of 2018, put off at the specific request of the county board chairman and the sheriff. We like solving problems. We thrive on that, real problems. Compromise, look at the wage schedule. The epitome of compromise and reasonableness in the jobs that are being performed by workers represented by our union. We've also filed a grievance now demanding that this employer, you, the sheriff, the elected officials, rescind the layoff notices affecting our members. You failed to give us appropriate notice as mandated and mutually agreed upon by our collective bargaining agreement. Our members have a right to sit as equals with your representatives under the law in Illinois. To meet and confer regarding these decisions before they're made, not subsequent to them.
Okay, we're at 3 minutes, sir.
Show some real leadership, make the correct decision.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item of business. May I please have a motion to approve the minutes from August 24th and lay over the minutes from September 7th, 2017. I have a motion by Mr. Nicolosi, a second by Mr. Boomer, and jury. Any questions on the minutes before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business and announcements and communications. Clerk Mullins.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Mullins. Next item of business, we have board member correspondence. Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. On your desk, I put a flyer. It's showing a picture of Lindsay Langjack and Stephen Wright. They're going to get married on 11/11/2017. My family and I have been friends of the Langjack family for many years. I want you to look at this, and you'll see at the bottom there's a little note that I put on there. This is why. This is why I am supporting the sheriff and public safety in this county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a bit of sad news, if you will. For a number of years, the Tuskegee Airmen were brought to Rockford, and at Memorial Hall, me and a group of other veterans made sure that they come here to Rockford and to the Veterans Memorial Hall. What has happened now is this. I made contact with the source that I've been talking with for the last umpteen years, and the feeling is they don't have the help or the strength to come back to see us. So this year is the last year. If you were there in February for Black History Month, that you will see the group that I had coming to Rockford. And with that, I still want to do something for Black History Month, but I don't know what. Thank you.
We'll take that discussion up later. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report. First item, we received the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting has been awarded to the County of Winnebago by Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada for its comprehensive annual financial report. I want to say thank you to our finance department and also our auditing department for their efforts on that, so thank you very much. I want to congratulate Goodwill Industries and Sam Schmitz. Recently the governor was in town and they signed legislation here in town about the Excel Center. Just a point of reference, there are 10,000 folks 16 years to 24 years old who do not have a high school diploma and who are not currently enrolled. And this is a specialized program that I think will do a lot of good in our community in the future. The third quick item I have is I want to thank the Register Star for their editorial today. I would just say this, none of us like the financial picture in which we are going about making decisions. Not a person in this room. But in terms of where we're at, I did appreciate their comments on the validity of what we're actually looking at. We may disagree on how to go forward, but that is a different point altogether than where we've been and where we're at now. So thank you to them. Lastly, and obviously most important, I just want to pass along again my thoughts and prayers to the Wright family. I know I speak for the entire board on that, and we wish him a speedy recovery, and God bless him and his family. And thank him for his service, of course. With that, we will move on to our next item of business, our consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve our consent agenda? Mr. Nicolosi, a second by Mr. Hoffman, and jury. Any questions on the consent agenda before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Finance Committee, Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee report for finance, I would first like to approve budget amendments B through E, which is detention center, circuit court, probation, and circuit court and public defender. The vote in committee tonight was 6-1 in favor, and I so move.
We have a motion on the floor to take items B, C, D, and E together as a package, so we're just voting to bundle them. Motion by Mr. Biondo, a second by Mr. Jury, Boomer, Girl, and Salgado. All those in favor of bundling those four together signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to bundle passes. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. I then move for items B through E, budget amendments to be approved.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo to approve items B, C, D, and E together. A second by Mr. Jury, Boomer, and Mr. Girl. Any questions? Any comments by board members on the items before us? Seeing none, I will ask, are there any board members who object to this motion? I have Mr. Hoffman on the objection, and please, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. I have next, which is the old item J, which is a motion to approve amendments to the 2018 budget. Just a second. These are two large grants, 1.3 million, 91,120, and then the host fee, the 500,000 we're adding to the host fee budget, and the circuit court 27 for the bailiff. And I so move for these amendments.
We have a motion by Mr. Biondo on item J, and I have a second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Jury. Any questions by board members on item J before the board? Seeing none, I'll ask if there's any objections to the item before the board, item J. Seeing none, I'll cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. Item K is the 2018 budget laid over from September 11th, 2017 meeting. I make a motion to approve that budget.
We have a motion on the floor by Mr. Biondo on item K, the adoption of the 18 budget, a second by Mr. Jury and Boomer. Any questions, comments, any changes by board members? Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make an motion, an amendment to the existing budget, that we decrease the state's attorney budget cut from $300,000 to $200,000, and that we decrease the public defender's budget cut from $250,000 to $150,000, and use reserve funds to offset this decrease.
So we have a motion by Mr. Fellers to decrease the state's attorney's budget cut from $300,000 to $200,000. We have a decrease, a recommended decrease in the public defender's budget cut from $250,000 to $150,000, and we would use reserve funds to do that. I have a motion by Mr. Fellers. I have a second by Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Hoffman, and Mr. Jury. Any questions on this motion before the board? by Mr. Fellers? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please. Thank you.
Tassoni?
Yes.
Webster?
Yes.
Westcott?
Yes.
Wilson?
Yes.
Biondo?
No.
Booker?
No.
Boomer?
Yes. Yes.
Crosby?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Badusha?
Yes.
Girl?
No.
Goral?
Yes.
Hoffman?
Yes.
Jury?
Yes.
Kelly?
No.
McDonald?
No.
Nicolosi?
No.
Red?
Yes.
Salgado?
Yes.
Schultz?
No.
Yes, 7 no.
The motion to amend the budget has passed. Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. I will turn it back over to Mr. Biondo.
So this is like a 2018 amendment, so we don't have to,
It is now in the proposed fiscal year
Okay.
18 budget. Any other comments, Mr. Biondo? If not, I have a couple hands up. Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to present my budget amendment for the 2018 budget, and it reads as follows. Reduce public safety budget by 10% instead of the 20% that was offered to us in this budget. Total cut would be $2.1 million. Reduce the judicial budget by 5% instead of the 8.5% that was recommended. Total cut would be $539,000 and change. Reduce the total government budget by just over $1 million. This includes all other departments other than public safety. And we would use an additional $750,000 from the host fee to offset the capital needs in various departments. And that would leave roughly about $1.6 million to come from the reserve funds to accommodate for any additional deficits. With these amendments, the actual budget would be about $97,000 in the black. So I put this for a motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Girl, and I want to make sure I get this read properly. Thank you very much. Budget amendment for the fiscal year 18 budget to reduce the public safety budget by 10% instead of 20%, for a total cut of $2.163 million. Reduce the judicial budget by 5% instead of the 8.5%, total cut of $539,955.05. Reduce the total general government budget by $1,653,000. Includes the proposed cuts of $425,000. Use an additional $750,000 from host fee fund to offset capital needs in various departments. Lastly, use $1.64 million from reserves to accommodate for any additional deficit shortfalls. I have a motion by Mr. Girl on those handful of changes. I have a second by Mr. Nicolosi, a second, and Mr. McDonald, Mr. Westcott, and Mr. Booker. Are there any questions by board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask Carla on those numbers that were offered on the reserve and on the host fee, where does that put us as far as security? Are we still going to be above the losing our bond?
I don't know because it was just presented to me right before the meeting. I don't know.
You have a guesstimation?
It probably would be very close.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Any other questions by board members?
I'll make a guesstimation. Thank you. The point is that we have, for 12 years, actually reduced our reserves by $11 million. This year, it's going to be 2.5. And now, with some of the things that just passed, it'll be probably a little more. So we're down to 8.5. With the reserves that we're now talking about here, we're going to add another, let's see, 100, well, it's hard to do, but to add 750,000 on host fees. And I mean, that might as well be reserves because that's how we use it, only for our economic development. And all I'm saying is we as a government are going to continue to live off the cuff. And so what I see is, what happens, these are just temporary fixes. We aren't adding to those funds at all. They're temporary fixes. They lead directly to, within a year, I'll be gone, thank God. But the other thing is, I thought I did applause. This leads to tax anticipation warrants, where you start borrowing on the following year's taxes. And I've been there. I've seen what happens. It goes, in the school district, it went from 30-something to 55 to $73 million. We're borrowing off the next, and you wind up paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in interest eventually. So that's what you're going to wind up with. And who pays the interest? It's the taxpayers. And we are also here for them. And I hate that we have to go through this because of this money. The other thing is, I started asking questions like, what happened to the $2.7 million a year that I helped obtain for the Sheriff's Department, and 2 years ago? And the other thing is, so apparently it didn't work very well. The other thing is, why is the sheriff laying off 60 reserve officers when 18 of his highest paid people make over $2.3 million? And I said it takes 60 people making almost $39,000 to equal $2.3 million. And the other thing is, if the reductions are reduced, I would like to know, I mean, people have asked us, have we been to the jail? Have we done this? Where do we cut then? Well, all we're doing is using temporary fixes to borrow money out of our reserves, and it's going to fall right on the taxpayers' backs. And we got to also think about them, and to think that we have to equal this. I want to know, where do we get this money then? After we finally start running out, you're going to be laying off people in the future, for sure. And two of the primary responsibilities of the sheriff under Illinois statute is his duties as custodian of the jail and the court security. And he's treating both of them first. Why is he kicking the lowest paid people out? And it's statutorily required under state law 55 ILCS 536017. And I think that our judge, instead of coming after us, he ought to go after the people who are violating the statute, which is the custodian of the jail and the court security, instead of ordering us to demand the taxpayers pay more. And that's what we're going to do if we keep adding to the deficit and adding to the reserves. And we cannot continue to borrow from that money and keep this county going for any more than a year or so. And it's all temporary fixes.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Ted. I agree with 99% of what you said, but that doesn't help us. I hear what you're saying, but we've got a problem right now. I would like to know, does Bert's amendment in any way overlap or conflict with Mr. Feller's amendment?
I would look to Carla for any guidance on that.
Somewhat, since the amendment now is by category and it's not broken down by department, so there would be some
There's some,
overlap.
okay, so we really, to get a fair thing, we need to reconcile that, I would think. The second thing I would like to know, it's pretty hard for me to make a vote. I hear what Ted says, but because of the situation, I would be willing to use some reserve funds, but not if it puts us into the place where it affects our bonds. I cannot go that far. I've heard the statement that we can fix our bonds, but you can't fix them in a year. You can't fix them in 2 years. We can fix money in reserves, maybe, if we get lucky next year, but we can't fix that bond rating that quick. So that, I have a problem with the bond rating, and I don't know where we stand right now.
Mr. Hoffman, I'll take that for a minute, and then if Carla wants to jump in, that'd be great, or Mr. Biondo. The projection, our projected revenue for next year, if we are off on the projection, if things turn out a little bit worse than we're projecting, after the analysis over several months. That is something we cannot 100% control. That's driven by the economy. So there are factors that, again, this projection for next year has been done with very thorough financial analysis, but that is another factor that does come into play here. And, I would just turn to Carla for a minute. She could offer a very quick 30-second recap of her discussion with Moody's, just so that it's clear on the floor the context in which some of those comments have been made. We do not want to make more or less of those comments. We just want it to be clear as to what it is.
The discussion was that they were concerned about the continued deficit spending without any plan to rectify it. I assured them that we would work towards adopting a balanced budget this year. Even with that, just because of the state of Illinois and their problems, there's still some concern that we're not going to be able to sustain our good financial condition. We're only keeping our bond rating right now because we had substantial reserves that we've continued to use. But if we drop below a fund balance policy that we've adopted, that will have a very, very negative impact.
Can I answer? Mr. Bianco? The fact is that with all the cuts that we had listed, the balance of this year was going to, let's see, in the balance, the fund balance. So that gets us the Moody ratings. We were going to only have 19,000 above that limit, the 25% and whatever else. So with all the things that's already been added, with the 200,000, that's from 300 down to 2 and 250 down to 150, we've already went below that without this amendment. Now, I can answer that one correctly, and we are only 19,000 above that limit with the budget as it stood. And now we're going to be way below, and if this goes through, forget it.
Thank you, Mr. Biondo. I have Mr. McDonald, and then I would come back to Mr. Gurl a second time if there's no other questions by board members. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've worked with you most recently. We've approved a lobbyist to Springfield to help with our, see what funds we can find and bring back. You propose using $500,000 out of the host fee to look for efficiencies, and I think that's a terrific idea. We've also decided to partner up and come up with a strategic plan. I agree with that as well. I think it's a terrific idea. I think these will help our overall efficiency in the county, and moving forward, be able to find some dollars. I think this is a great balance. It's more than what I want, it's less than what you want. It's working together, it's being compassionate. It's not taking so much from the sheriff in one swipe. Do I think that he's got adjustments that he can make? Absolutely. Do I think he can make 4.3 in 1 year? Absolutely not. Let's work together and ease the burden and ease the blow and find solutions that we can all deal with, we can all live with.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Just one point of clarification for everybody. The $500,000, which you rightly mentioned, will go into, and it is in the recommended, or I'm sorry, the proposed fiscal year 18 budget from host fees. That is in there now, so thank you for pointing that out. I had another hand pop up, but I will end with you, Mr. Gurl, the second time. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our question, you have reduced the total general government budget by $1,063,000. Now, looking at this fund, the personnel fund line item that's 13500 for administrative, that is almost entirely our health insurance cost, correct?
I will refer that to Carla, just so we're clear on the floor. Carla?
Yeah, the majority of it is. There are other costs in that budget for employee parking, towing, that we pay in order to receive towing revenue.
So this,
that's the majority. So
this would be another additional than 10% on top of what's been cut out, roughly 8.5%, 9%, 10% of what's been cut out of general government already. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Any other questions by board members? If not, I'll go back to the gentleman that made the motion in the first place, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fellers, my calculations did not include the administrative line item that you mentioned and include all other departments except for administration with the health fee fund. So just that, to make that clear. That $1 million also included the proposed cuts, the $425,300 from the recorder of deeds, and the other 125 of the collective reductions that were already proposed. So that is where I came up with that number. The health insurance fund was not touched. Also, I'd like to comment, ask a question, Carla. What is exactly our public safety tax reserve fund at this moment? Do you know if it's 14 million or if it's less?
It would be projected to be $13,998 at the end of 18.
In the reserve fund for the public safety fund?
Yes.
Okay,
However, we're going to have to shift things around because we just put the general and public safety sales tax fund and discussed that we would need to shift things in order to make the fund balances, because our general is so close. A lot of the expenditures are sitting in the general fund budgets and they'll have to be moved over to the public safety sales tax.
Just a clarification, Carla, 13 million or 13,000?
I'm sorry, 13 million.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, be scared there for a real quick second. Okay, so the 13 million, 25% of that, of our actual intake of sales tax projected at 28 million. 25% is way less than 14 million. I don't think 1.6 million, if it was taken out of that fund, would actually ruin our chances at a downgrade from Moody's. So we are way above our 25%.
I think the continued deficit spending would impact that.
No, and you're absolutely correct. And I think the majority of this board and most everybody realizes that we need a strategic plan moving forward. If we would have came up with a plan, say 8 years ago, we probably would not be sitting in this situation right now. But a lot of the board members that were on the board back then that continue to exercise, the motion that we just kept deficit spending after year, I would put the blame on you. No strategic plan moving forward. We did not increase any revenue as far as property taxes. We left 18 million on the table, which never came back into our sales tax revenues. And we can see that throughout the years, going back to 08, that there was no increase at all. So that money that we saved, the taxpayers, never really came back into this community. It was either used on paying down debt, or it was saved. It was not brought back into the community. What we need is a actual strategic plan moving forward. I have proposed to Chairman Haney about forming an ad hoc committee to actually address these concerns, made up of our union staff, made up of community members, business leaders, and some of our finance department and other board members to move forward so we're not sitting in this situation next year. My amendment is not perfect. There's cuts that still will be made. Next year's forecast looks about the same, but if we don't do anything now, if we just sit back and say, balanced budget's great, public safety, most people are safe, I think that we're really kidding ourselves. Our number one core responsibility should be providing a safe environment for our residents and for the residents that come and visit here. That's your number one goal. Not a great bond rating, sure, that helps, but we can work on those things in the future. And the more people we can get to stay here and move here and live here, and businesses that can come here, will ease the burden on property taxes. And Mr. Biondo should know that. With more people moving out, more people have to pick up the pie. And that's what we're seeing. Every one person that moves here, 3 are leaving. It's sad. It's not because of our Moody rating, it's not because of our bond rating, it's because of crime, property taxes, infrastructure, education, you name it. But crime hinges on everything. People don't feel safe, they're not going to come here, they're not going to spend money. I would just like to finish by urging my fellow board members to come to a compromise and work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Girl. Are there any other questions by board members?
I would just like to add
Mr. Biondo.
that, that I will not apologize for keeping $20 million in taxpayers' pockets over the last 6 years. The fact that we are paying in Illinois the highest median tax rate in the United States, and it's only 2.6, so that means you pay $2,600 for a $100,000 house. Well, in Rockford and Winnebago County, we're 4 to 5.5. So we're double the median tax of Illinois, which is the highest in the United States. I think the people have paid enough. Government needs to cut some of its own size once in a while.
Okay, we're going to keep everything quiet, and we're only going to have one person talking at a time. That's how it's going to go. Thank you, Mr. Biondo. Are there any other questions by board members on this on the motion before us? I have Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Bert, you know, this is a tough situation, and I do agree it's very tough. And Ted, I agree with you. Just the other day, I took the opportunity I wanted to kind of get a feel on this community's pulse and see what was happening, people moving in and out. I went down to the U-Haul place, near mine, Fort Hill Road, and I asked the guy, I said, you know, I'm kind of concerned, you know, I've heard all kinds of people saying people are leaving Illinois in this community. I said, could you furnish me the information of how many trucks that you rent one way? And this was amazing. He told me, Gary, he said, you're not going to like what I'm going to tell you. And the guy's right there at Forest Hills Road. You can go ask him. Out of the 3 places that U-Haul has, from 9/6 to just a couple days ago, they've rented 226 trucks one way. They cannot keep trucks in this community. They have to go get trucks to rent. We're in a tough situation. People don't want more taxes. People want a balanced budget. Unfortunately, we're in a situation where we tonight will have to make that decision, and it's not going to be easy on any of us. I just want to throw that information out to you. 226 trucks. And they were families. They weren't college people. They were families moving out of this community.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Are there any other specific questions about the motion before us, Mr. Earl's motion before us? I have 2 more questions. Hand popped up, Mr. Booker, then Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As everybody well knows, I'm not that far removed from the Sheriff's Department, and I'm aware of what we have in front of us. Ted Biondo brought up a good point that this is a temporary fix, what Mr. Girl is proposing, his amendment here. But the key word is fix. It is a temporary fix. A couple of us, Mr. Chairman, myself, and a couple others are 9 months into the county board here, and I see positive changes coming. We've got a staff of Amanda, Julia, Carla, and Johns that are finding waste. We're going to start moving out of this hole, but we also got to remember lives. We're talking a lot about numbers. We're talking a lot about numbers. We've got to consider lives. What happened the other night, an officer was just inches from losing his life. I was working as a supervisor in the 911 center the night of the train derailment on Mulford Road. Had we not had that 911 center, we're talking about losing operators. 911 operators. Had we not had that center, it would have been absolutely chaotic in order to communicate with anyone. We had 1 fatality that night. There might have been much more. But we've got a temporary fix in front of us. A temporary fix in front of us that can be explored. And I'm not only talking about citizens' lives, but I'm talking about officer safety. Officer safety on the street, officer safety in the jail. I implore you to take Burke Earl's amendment into serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have this to say. We as county board members are at a level of government where we have to be responsible to the taxpayers. We are going to have to make decisions that sometimes aren't popular. They can be unpopular. We should be looking for the best interests of the taxpayers of this country. Because it's been mentioned that we're the highest taxes that are paid in this country, and that's not a good picture to paint. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Seeing no other, oh, Mrs. Gorel, I apologize.
Thank you, Chairman. Bert, you came on the board after I did, and I want you to know that back when I started, we were looking for temporary fixes. We've been doing temporary fixes and more temporary fixes until now we have backed ourselves up to a wall. There are no more temporary fixes. You have to look forward. You can't go back and blame, and probably you should blame us from the last 10 years when everything dropped out and tax money went down the drain, that we had to fight for our lives and try to swim to the surface and keep the county going and our different departments going. We did that, and we cut, and we cut, and we cut. Now, I don't know how much more we're going to cut. We have to do what we have to do now. No more temporary fixes. If we don't level this out today, please don't count on what's going to come in tomorrow. You have no clue, you have no magic ball that's going to say you're going to have a lot of tax money coming in and a lot of resources, because we're being drained from all different places. Even the state of Illinois is now draining us. So we have to look at today and what we can do today, and then work on through a strategic plan what we can do for tomorrow. But it has to be what's today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Are there any other board members who have a comment to make? I think we've talked around this issue pretty thoroughly at this point. I'm not hearing any new questions about specifics here. So that, again, thank you for the motion, Mr. Girl. Mr. Girl's motion is before us, and I'm going to, so there's clarity on the floor, ask the clerk to call the roll so that we have a clear roll call.
Webster?
Excuse me, point of order, I'm sorry. Mr. Nicolosi?
Second for Bert's.
Yes, it is on the floor before us. Thank you for clarifying that Mr. Girl's motion is before the board for consideration. We are voting on that now, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Clerk Mullins.
Webster?
No.
Westcott?
Yes.
Wilson?
No.
Biondo?
No.
Booker?
Yes.
Boomer? Crosby? No. Fellers?
No.
Fiducia?
No.
Girl?
Yes.
Gorel? No. Hoffman?
Yes.
Jury?
No.
Kelly?
No.
McDonald?
Yes.
Nicolosi?
Yes.
Red? No. Salgado?
No.
Schultz?
No.
Tassoni?
Yes.
7 yes and 13 no.
Motion on the floor fails, and so before us is the proposed fiscal year 18 budget, which does include Mr. Feller's amendment that was added this evening at the direction of the board. That is the item before the board. Are there any questions on the item before the board at this point? Mr. Nicolosi.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say for the record, in good conscience, I cannot support this budget as it stands. I do know that each and every board member here feels passionately about public safety, and I do get that, but this is irresponsible to our constituents and public safety. After FBI reports listing a rise in violent crime in our city, a deputy shot, and countless pending lawsuits coming our way from our own county, we have to do better. Alternatives do exist, and I'm urging board members to tighten their belts in their ways. We have ideas, we just need more time. So, Chairman, I'm asking you in the next 60 days to follow up on Bert's idea of an ad hoc committee to not only look at this next budget, but possibly what we can do for this budget as well in retrospect, and see if we can find more money and keep tackling and keep chipping away at this. We owe our constituents that much. Thank you.
When we adopt the budget this evening, the one that is before the board, or an amended version of it, as the board knows, as the board has demonstrated it knows for many years, that the board can make changes to the budget as it sees fit. Any other questions by board members Mr. Salgado?
Yes, I just want to make a comment here. I just want to say thank you to the staff that took numerous hours in doing this. I know we held finance committees, from special committees, meetings, trying to find resolutions to the budget mess that we're in. It's not uncommon. We've heard it. Mr. Biondo, explained it well. I think he gives a lot of knowledge when it comes down to that. However, I do want a point of clarification, information for next year. As I mentioned in the past, I think the process could have been a little bit easier in the sense of going what direction we wanted to go. And I've made this comment in the past, kind of setting the tone of what direction, whether it's the whole county board giving guidance on what direction, whether it's new growth, CPI, or nothing whatsoever, setting the direction that we want to go into. I think that's the most critical. Once this has evolved, there's been many amendments. I know Mr. Girl has been throwing a couple out there, but at this point in time, a lot of the county board members, and I don't know, I could be corrected here, they want a balanced budget, they don't want surplus reserve spending, and they don't want to increase taxes. So at the end of the day, someone has to make a decision. And unfortunately, at this point in time, the cuts need to come. And that's the unfortunate piece. I understand where Mr. Nicolosi, we agree. I agree public safety is very important for a community to keep us safe and to bring tranquil to our city and county as a whole. But unfortunately, we know where the direction of the county board wants to hit. No new taxes, balanced budget, no reserve spending. The other piece of it that you have left, as we mentioned, is cuts. That's the only place. And I understand from departments, because I've gone through this, through different organizations and businesses, at the end of the day, we're at bare bones. So where do you cut? Unfortunately, the direction that has gone has been the public safety, the sheriff's department. But once again, I think that strategically, we need to find a way to find a direction that we need to go into for the budget, so we can make decisions and proper amendments, so everybody's not all over the place. But once again, like I said, we're in agreement. We want a balanced budget, number one. No reserve spending, so we meet our threshold, which is the 25% piece of it, and obviously no more new taxes. Bottom line. So that's the direction. The rest, the chips fall elsewhere. So that's all I have to say. And once again, I just want to mention, I think as a county board, we need to find the direction that we want to go into to make decisions more effectively. And I commend everybody in this room for taking the tough decisions once again and illustrating the numbers, what they are, and where we're going to end up, and projecting a budget that we can live with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. I would just offer this as a matter of just some additional background. I believe I've talked to every board member at one point in this process, offline about their appetite for additional property tax increase, and I know consistently I heard a message that was not in favor of it. I know there was discussion in numerous open meetings as well as small group meetings that we had, but I respect your point. I think you make an interesting point about the process next year. If the board wants to offer the finance committee at the beginning of the process some thoughts going in, that whether they do or don't does not preclude them, nor has it precluded them. In fact, we've had some very active non-finance committee members take a very active role in following this budget line by line when the finance committee was entertaining it, and even when it came to the full board. But it's a very good point. Another point of clarification is there is reserve spending that is being done in this proposed budget before the board, and I know that's also been a point of great discussion. And I echo your comments, thanking people for how seriously they've taken the process. Any other board member questions? I got Mr. Fellers, then Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, there's been a lot of doom and gloom tonight. So let's maybe kind of change things a little bit. As someone who's been in the private sector for his entire career, I've been through plenty of these types of budget cuts. They're never easy, but out of conflict like this usually comes something really good if you know what you're doing. This is the time for our elected officials, our department heads, our county board members, and the public to come up with creative solutions, because the way we've been doing business simply is no longer going to work. We can't just simply say we're going to find more efficiencies, we're going to find more efficiencies. We have to be creative and do things that are special and come up with a whole new way of doing business. Otherwise, we will go through this again next year, and the year afterwards, and the year afterwards. That means, does it mean do we change how we police? Yes, it's going to mean we change how we police. We try to do a better job. Does it mean we change how we run central government? Yes, we must change how we run central government and every other department. Because we all have less money, we will all have less money next year, and we will all have less money the year afterwards. That's a fact. So let's take this and make it an opportunity and change it for the better, instead of just trying to be all doom and gloom about how it's all going to go to heck. Thank you.
Mr. Fellers, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Public Safety Committee Chairman Fiducia, you did a terrific job with the reporting the animals every month and what's going on in the animal shelter. I was wondering if maybe I could ask the Sheriff's Department if they could provide statistics to the Public Safety Committee Chairman, and I would like to hear those month over month and year over year to see if the decision we make tonight indeed impacts the crime.
We're not going to have people to do it. Oh.
Excuse me, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll have one at a time, and we'll be held in the gallery, please. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I do the animal reports every month, at the end of every month. However, the sheriff is supposed to report to our committee every 3 months, and he hasn't showed up.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. With that, are there any other questions, or are we ready to take the vote on the budget? Excuse me, Mr. Caruana. Mr. Caruana. Mr. Jury. We have a calling of the question. I have a second on calling the question. Mr. Boomer. With that, all those in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? So we will call the question and take the vote on the fiscal year 18 budget that is before the board as amended, and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Westcott?
No.
Wilson? Yes. Biondo?
Yes.
Booker?
No.
Boomer?
Yes.
Crosby?
Yes.
Fellers?
Yes.
Fiducia?
Yes.
Gurl?
No.
Gorel?
Yes.
Hoffman?
No.
Jury?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
McDonald?
Hell no.
Absolutely not.
Red?
Can't hear.
Red?
Yes.
Salgado?
Yes.
Schultz?
No.
Tassoni?
No.
Webster?
Yes.
$12 yes, 8 no.
With that, the fiscal year 18 budget is adopted. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The fiscal item L.
Excuse me, please. Excuse me, ma'am.
Sheriff, I don't like being attacked by people just because I'm here at a meeting. See? Are you going to do anything? You got me? You're not going to do anything.
The number 5 in the country, not
Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve, motion to approve fiscal year 2018 annual appropriation ordinance laid over from September 11th, 2017 meeting. And I
We
so
have,
move.
we have a motion by Mr. Biondo. May I have a second, Mr. Boomer? We have a second by Mr. Boomer. Any discussion by board members on the motion before the board? Seeing none, are there any board members who object to this motion? I have an objection by Mr. Schultz and by Mr. Gurl. I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all other members present. Motion passes. Mr. Biondo.
Thank you. Last item here would be a motion to lay over items M through Y, which are the tax levies. I'm sorry, it's just reading through, and these should be laid over until October 26th.
We have a motion to read in. Is that just item M, or are you looking?
No, M through Y, because it's all the same thing. That's all the tax levies. It requires the EAP and everything else to all be figured out before we do the levies themselves.
Understood. So we have a motion, and if we could have quiet in the room, please. We have a motion on M through Y to lay over on the tax levies. I have a motion by Mr. Biondo. I have a second by Mr. Boomer and Jury and Mr. Wilson. Any questions by board members on item M through Y before the board? Seeing none, are there any board members who object to this motion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes. Mr. Biondo.
That concludes our report.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Biondo. Next item of business is the zoning committee. Mr. Webster. Thank you, Mr. Biondo.
Thank you, Chairman. Your zoning committee has one item for reading this evening. It is Z1617. It's a map amendment to rezone some property from Ag Priority District to the Rural Estate District. It is PIN number 0801376001. It's in County Board District 7. And this came with unanimous approval from both the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Zoning Committee as well. And so it's in for the first reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Okay.
Did we have a question, Mr. Fellers?
No, I was just going to move to suspend the rules and approve this tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers.
We have a motion by Mr. Fellers to suspend the rules, which would allow us to vote this evening. I have a second by Mr. Wilson, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Kelly, and Mr. Booker. So the item before us is to suspend the rules. Any questions? All those in favor of suspending the rules, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. The item passes. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. That gets these people off on their construction project that's been dragging for lack of the proper zoning. Thank you.
Suspended the rules.
Sorry. Who made a motion? You. Okay. All right.
Which motion?
I'll make a motion to suspend the rules on this.
We already did.
Second.
We have a motion to approve. I have a motion by Mr. Webster to approve. I have a second by Mr. Fellers. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Webster.
Thank you. It's been a very long evening. Our next meeting will be October 25th, 2017 at 5:30. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Mr. Westcott, Economic Development.
Thank you, Chairman. We have an ordinance adopting administrative recommendations for 2018 host fee allocations, and I would like Mrs. Hangricker would speak on this.
Sure. The only purpose for this ordinance is to shore up those areas in the budget meaning there are no recommendations for giving outside of our own budget. It's the entire purpose, is just to match up to the budget.
Thank you, Amanda. Mr. Westcott?
So move.
We have a motion by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Boomer. Any discussion by board members, Mrs. Red, or a second by Mrs. Red as well, her included, and any questions by board members? Since it's an ordinance, I'll ask if there's any board members who object to this motion. I have an objection by Mr. McDonald, and I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all other members present. Motion passes. Mr. Westcott.
That concludes my report, and go Bears.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Operations Committee, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Your Operation Administrative Committee has 3 resolutions before you this evening. The first one is a resolution authorizing the execution of intergovernmental agreement between the 4th Preserves of Winnebago County and the County of Winnebago for provision of health insurance, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any questions by board members on the resolution before the board? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. The next one is a resolution awarding a bid for document shredding services, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury, a second by Mr. Hoffman, and a second by Mr. Earl and Mrs. Red. Any questions by board members? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I only saw one bid. Did we only get one bid?
The question on the floor is, was there only one bid on this? Ann?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there was only one bidder. We reached all the way to the Chicago suburbs trying to get other bidders. The fact that we wanted shredding done on site limited our participation, I think.
How did it compare with what we're paying now?
We actually got a reduction from $10 per dump to 5, or excuse me, from 10 to 8, so we're actually getting a reduction.
Thank you very much, Ann. Mr. Schultz, any other questions, sir? Okay, any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. Our next resolution is the fixing county holiday schedule for 2018, and I move for its adoption.
You have a motion by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Hoffman, Mrs. Girl, and Mrs. Red. Any questions on item D, fixing county holiday schedule? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. That concludes our report.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Westcott has one more item we've got to just clarify real quick. Thank you, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you again, Chairman. It looks like we have to have a, we have to suspend the rules in order to adopt this ordinance.
On the Economic Development Committee, under item B, I need it, just so we tie this off, we need a motion to suspend the rules, which allow us to take the action this evening. I have a motion by Mr. Westcott, I have a second by Mrs. Crosby and Mr. Hoffman. All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Opposed, Mr. McDonald. All other board members signify by saying aye. Motion passes. We've suspended the rules. Mr. Westcott.
And I move to...
Excuse me. Mr. Westcott.
And I move to adopt the ordinance.
We have a motion by Mr. Westcott to adopt the ordinance of which we just suspended the rules. May I have a second? Mr. Hoffman on the second. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, are there any board members who object to this motion? Mr. McDonald. All other board members, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Thank you very much. Mr. Westcott.
Well, that concludes our report again, and go Bears again.
Thank you very much. Any other new business or unfinished business before the board? Yes, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in the spirit of some of the discussion tonight in regard to planning ahead. I understand that the new administration is just that new, including staff, including Carla. So the opportunity to do this to this point has not really been practical, but I would strongly recommend that we look at a multi-year financial planning process, and 3 years comes to mind where we would do projections of both income, revenue, and expenses by department, and we would include things that we know about to the best of our ability. Those projections would then be a foundation for conversations with department heads and elected officials well in advance of the time that they would have to make decisions. As I mentioned at the last meeting, Chairman Haney has talked about the budget problem that we have, the deficit that we were facing since prior to being elected. A number of us in the room have seen the same kind of conversation iteratively. But it's possible that that 3-year plan, which we would have to update frequently going forward from the time it's originally done, would position folks to make harder decisions earlier, would position the board to give their input regarding priorities earlier, and would possibly, while not making the process easier in terms of hard decisions, would make people feel more informed and more empowered. And it would eliminate the criticisms that we keep getting annually, where it's, well, we didn't have input, we didn't have time, we didn't have warning, which I think are not accurate in reality because of prior things I've already said, but it would help to alleviate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz and Mr. Webster.
I just want to say one thing about, there's a phrase oftentimes you hear, well, I didn't know. How was I supposed to know? I would have been there. Our meetings are all public, and they're all posted publicly. Anyone can come, and permission of the chairman of any of the committee, they can all speak. Any of the public can weigh in on any of the issues that we have to deal with.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Any other questions by board members? I did skip over a couple of our final committees, which I do not believe offer a report tonight. So my apologies. Is there anything you'd like to add, Mr. Kelly? Mr. Ford? No report. Mr. Fiducia, my apologies, sir.
I have no report, although I did have an animal story report, but I'm not going to give it because I don't want my motion to override my own.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Mr. Fellers, a second by Mr. Wilson and Nicolosi and Huffman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Have a good evening. Thank you.